Hello everyone. I believe the video is already loading, even though it has not brought up my full face. So as you see, I'm still lacking a haircut and still a shaggy, frizzy mess. But hopefully we will fix that soon, just like many things that we also need fixing. So today I'm going to talk about the 1793 yellow fever epidemic. It is one of those events that is somewhat important today already, given that we live in the middle of a pandemic. But this story, this incident, this event was really very much a defining moment for the black community in Philadelphia for many reasons, and is in some part inextricably connected to the African freedom struggle, not just in Philadelphia, but throughout the Western Hemisphere. So, before I begin, I will, as I always do, remind, teach, tell you who I am. As I point out, all too often, we are subjected to memes and information and posts by people that share supposed facts that turn out to be inaccuracies, lies, myths, or conspiracies. And so I always challenge those of you who are watching to always pay attention to the source. Always look for the sources of information. It's why after I give these videos, I will make sure that I provide links to information to validate and support some of the things I'm discussing here today. Oh my goodness, I should have brushed my hair. Look how frizzy I am. But anyway, see, vanity. Videos and vanity. So, considering the source means considering who I am, and my name is Joseph Solar. I am an adjunct professor of history and specifically African American history at Rowan College of Burlington County. I also teach occasionally at Pierce College and Alvernia University, where I teach sociology and ethics and public speaking. So, my background is I hold a bachelor's degree in history and African American studies from Harvard University, where I learned from some really just mind-blowingly awesome people. And I hold a master's and a PhD in urban education from Temple University, where I likewise learned from some pretty awesome people. So I'm blessed to have had an education from remarkable human beings. They've taught me how to think, how to see, how to analyze. They taught me facts and information, and so I try to honor their teaching by passing on what knowledge I have to others. So, with that out of the way, let's begin. So last week, what inspired this talk, and a few more to come actually, was I was discussing Richard Allen and the founding of the African Methodist Episcopal Church in Philadelphia. And one of the points that I was making, hopefully clearly, was that the founding of the African Methodist Episcopal Church was not purely the result of the discrimination, which was increasing and definitely existed against African people and African Americans in Philadelphia, but as the result of a growing social cohesiveness in the African and African American community in Philadelphia, driven by leaders like Richard Allen and Absalom Jones for mutual improvement and uplift. And so Richard Allen ends up being this towering and remarkable figure whose career spans until the 1830s, when he finally moves on to the next life, if you will. But in the midst of all this, in this idea of considering the growth and the build of the African American community in Philadelphia, we must consider the yellow fever epidemic of 1793. So to fully appreciate the context of this event, this earth-shattering, world-changing, well, it was very important. But we have to look at the world that existed around the hemisphere And what was happening in 1793 were several major events. One, the United States Capitol was in Philadelphia. It was in Philadelphia because the U.S. government was building a brand new capital, which would be the city of Washington in the District of Columbia during that time. And so while they worked on building the new capital, which is the current capital, they relocated to Philadelphia from New York, which was the original capital of the United States. So in 1793, all of those founding fathers you've already learned about were here. John Adams, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson. Actually, Jefferson might have gone home already to Virginia, but James Madison, Benjamin Franklin had died, but you get the idea. All the people on the money from the early American Republic were residing in Philadelphia and presiding in Philadelphia. One of the consequences of the American Revolution was the French Revolution. And the French Revolution breaks out in 1789. So the year that we elect George Washington, the first president of the United States, the French government, awash in debt they accumulated helping us to win our revolution, breaks out in revolution. So what does this have to do with yellow fever, Philadelphia, all these different issues? Well, a couple of things. One is that Philadelphia, as a city that practiced religious freedom from its founding, had attracted a French Protestant dissident community in the past. So there were already formerly French citizens now becoming American citizens living in Philadelphia. But most importantly, during the French Revolution, the enslaved people of the French sugar colony of Saint-Domingue, today called Haiti, had risen in revolution. And this revolution would eventually lead to the establishment of the Republic of Haiti in 1803. And the first republic outside the United States, and the first republic founded by enslaved people. And as you can imagine, this incident, this revolt, was alternately inspiring and horrifying depending on where a person stood with regards to slavery. But more specifically, the revolution in Saint-Domingue in Haiti led to a wave of Dominguez, or French, refugees from Haiti, and ships sailing from Haiti to Philadelphia and discharging their passengers into Philadelphia, where they could seek asylum from the U.S. government. And what that means is the people fleeing Haiti were the slave owners. The white French were fleeing from their now formerly enslaved people and from the war. And the ships that brought these French slavers to Philadelphia also brought mosquitoes. And yellow fever is a disease that comes with mosquitoes. As an aside, 1 year after the yellow fever epidemic in 1794, the French revolutionary government actually abolished slavery throughout the entire French Empire, which was remarkable and incredible. But Napoleon reimposed slavery. So the French were ahead of us, and then they fell behind us. But once again, this connection between the United States and France. So these ships come from the Caribbean carrying refugees from Haiti, and they carry these mosquitoes. They dock on Front Street in Philadelphia. They discharge their refugee passengers, and they discharge these mosquitoes. The city of Philadelphia in the 1790s was gross. There's no way around it. This is a world without indoor plumbing. This is a world without paved streets. This is a world where horses and other animals walk the streets and just dump everywhere. This is a world without sanitation, no garbage trucks. And so there are concentrations all throughout the city of mosquitoes' favorite breeding grounds, stagnant water. Most of these filthy, stagnant water areas were in the highly concentrated, poor areas of the city along the docks. And so when the yellow fever epidemic hits, spoiler alert, preview, within the year 1793, approximately 10%, about 5,000 people, will die that year of the yellow fever in Philadelphia. And the overwhelming majority of them will die in these poor neighborhoods that are filthy breeding grounds for mosquitoes. Medicine at the time did not understand this. And in fact, Benjamin Rush, he who had been such a good friend to Richard Allen and Absalom Jones and the free black community of the city, was one of the people who began to figure out and narrow down the causes of yellow fever. But when the outbreak occurred, there was a lot of incorrect information about the yellow fever epidemic and the disease of yellow fever. Benjamin Rush, for example, believed pretty much that any treatment or any disease could be treated by bleeding people. They would just cut you and just bleed blood out of you in an attempt to restore your health. It did work to cut down your fever because, of course, when you run out of blood, your temperature drops. So bad evidence or bad causality for the evidence. But one of the beliefs related to this was that African people were immune to the fever. And so by 1793, this is a city with the largest, most dense population of any American city at this point, though New York is catching up very quickly during this decade. And it was also a city that was attracting a larger and larger free black population. Allen himself, who had been born in Philly and then sold to Delaware, returned to Philadelphia seeking his opportunities in his life. And so in a densely packed, hot, dirty, cranky summer, there were tensions between different communities that lived in the city. Philadelphia then, like Philadelphia today, was a city of kind of overwhelming diversity on the broad scale, but block by block, neighborhood by neighborhood, it was subdivided into religious communities and ethnic communities. Ironically, because African people and African Americans were considered in 1793 to be uncultivated barbarians, to quote Phyllis Wheatley in a poem which says the opposite, of course. The black community was pushed out of what was considered the more important housing. And so the Mother Bethel Church will be located at 6th and Lombard, so the southern edge and the western edge of the city. What that means, though, is that the black community of Philadelphia was actually outside of the hotspot for yellow fever. And so rates of contagion initially were likely lower because the yellow fever outbreak was concentrated along the docklands and along specifically Dock Street in Philly, where it was a giant trash pile because people would dump all of their garbage into the Dock Creek, which used to stand where Dock Street is today in Old City. So the black community is outside of the massive infection zone. But the city believes, or Benjamin Rush, the doctor, believes that the black community has some special immunity to yellow fever. And interestingly enough, decades later, we would see in another outbreak, I believe in Charleston, a lower mortality rate among African Americans of yellow fever during a Charleston outbreak. And it might be the result of immunity, because yellow fever is a tropical disease. African people from Africa would more likely be exposed to it and develop some immunity. But either way, Benjamin Rush goes to Allen and Jones, and with the appeal of the mayor says, look, the city of Philadelphia needs you. But it's more than the city of Philadelphia, because of course Philadelphia is the capital of the United States. And all of the government of our nation resided and was operating in the city. And when there is a massive outbreak in the capital city of a brand new nation, that sort of thing is an existential crisis, because what would have happened if in 1793 George Washington and John Adams and John Jay and Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson, if he was still here, but I don't think he was, what if they had all gotten yellow fever and died? We would have lost the founding leadership of our nation. Now, the threat of that actually happening was not as large as it could have been, because, of course, those men were rich. And the wealthy people fled the city. And in fact, the U.S. government moves to Germantown. Germantown, so those of you from Philly, if you go up Germantown Ave, you can find where Washington lived and all these different little historic tidbits from the yellow fever, where the U.S. government, so the U.S. Capitol was for a few months located in Germantown, northwest Philly. So they flee the city, leaving behind the poor. And when I say flee the city, I mean people are fleeing the city desperately. People are just abandoning sick family members. Servants, paid servants, not enslaved people, are just abandoning the households where they live. And so people are being left to die in their homes or in the streets, because people are so terrified of this disease, they don't understand that they're just trying to run away from it. Now, the good news is, because it's not transmissible through people, those people did not carry the disease with them when they went, which is, of course, what's happening right now in the pandemic, where the coronavirus is transmissible. So if people flee and they're infected, they'll spread the disease. In this case, the mosquitoes had to move someplace else, and mosquitoes were thriving where they were, in the filthy, stagnant water along the Philadelphia dockyards and along Dock Street. So the mosquitoes don't travel far and wide, and the disease doesn't spread as far as it could. However, doctors didn't know this, and so the Bush Hill Hospital, which was the first hospital in Philadelphia, is packed, and no one wants to work there because they're afraid of getting sick and dying. And Richard Allen will go to the pulpit, and Absalom Jones will go to the pulpit, and they will call upon their congregants and call upon their members to serve their city, to step in and do all of the jobs and all of the work that needs to be done in a city where dozens of people are dying every day of a mysterious disease of unknown cause, and people are sick from the disease. The hospital is packed to the gills with sick people, sick and dying, and they simply do not have workers. And the community responds, and the black community rallies behind Jones and Allen, and they get to work. The black community of Philadelphia in 1793 will end up dominating the nursing staff for the hospitals. They will provide in-home care to the sick and the dying. They will, and this is sad, but it's true. They will build, create, carve, nail together thousands of coffins for the dead. They will dig thousands of graves and bury thousands of the dead. They will tend to the sick, they will tend to the dead, both in homes, in the streets of the city, in the hospitals. And in fact, during the epidemic, one of the incidents related by Richard Allen in a little piece I'll read to you in a bit is that the mayor of the city offered clemency to people imprisoned if they would serve as nurses and basically medical orderlies to help care for and bury the dead. 5,000 people in 9 months in the city. And what Allen relates is that 2/3 of the prisoners who volunteered to work for their clemency were Africans. So the city is saved. Eventually, this disease actually does go away with weather changes, unlike coronavirus. And so when the fall hits and the first cold snap comes, it kills the mosquitoes, which contains the spread of the disease by November. But through those 8 or 9 months in which 5,000 people died, it was the role of the Black community to care for and nurture and provide all of the medical treatments, the quarantines. But Rush also put the community to work in other ways, and he was a supporter because Rush, like I said, was beginning to narrow down the causes, and he didn't know that it was carried by mosquitoes, but he did note that filthier areas, foul-smelling areas, seemed to contain greater concentrations of sick and dying, and so one of the great kind of, if you call it a public works project, was cleaning up these filthy areas. And so again, it is largely members of the Black community in Philadelphia that go to Dock Street and go to a neighborhood, I kid you not, called Helltown. Yeah, it's right near where the Ben Franklin Bridge is today. Helltown. And they are literally cleaning out these filthy back alleys. They are cleaning out the homes of the dead because, again, people don't know whether their clothing contains the illness or their home, whether a home is a sick house. And so they're pulling down the homes of the infected. They're discarding and disposing, burning the belongings and clothes and filthy linens, the garbage, all of the filth and the mess that Rush identified as the cause of the illness, not knowing it was mosquitoes. Nonetheless, these efforts are somewhat effective because in cleaning out these filthy areas, they are cleaning out some of these still stagnant ponds where the mosquitoes were breeding. So what does this mean? What this means is members of the Black community in Philadelphia were not living in the sick areas of the city because they had been pushed out to the outskirts of the city by what we today would call racial prejudice. Back then it was a little more complex and messy because we hadn't drawn that firm black-white line yet. Call it cultural chauvinism, where the English think they're the best and everyone else are barbarians. But despite being outside of the danger zone, which of course helped keep the Black community safe, the members of the Black community voluntarily went into the danger zone, and as a consequence, 400 African Americans die of the disease because they put themselves in harm's way voluntarily to help serve their city and to help serve their neighbors. And this kind of all hands on deck gathering together helped forge a sense of community and identity among the members of the black community in the city. Because remember, again, Africans and African Americans come from different places. If people are coming to the city of Philadelphia because Pennsylvania is one of the few states that had abolished slavery gradually, so it's slow law, it means that these individuals coming together, the only thing they really have in common is their skin color and some relationship to slavery. Because you'll have people coming from the Congo or northwestern Africa or from Delaware or from New Jersey or from New York, right? They're coming from all other parts of the world. They don't know each other. They might not even speak the same type of English or English at all. Some might be Spanish and Portuguese speakers. But as a community, when they pull together to hold the line against the yellow fever, it builds a sense of solidarity and community within the black community of Philadelphia. And so the 1793 yellow fever epidemic is considered one of these formative events that after 1793 we can truly speak of a black community in Philadelphia that is socially coherent, that has a voice, and that is assertive with that voice. That it's not just, we live here and we're so grateful we're no longer slaves, but it's far more than that. And of course, for people like Washington, who are bringing their enslaved people with them to Philadelphia, this is a challenge to slavery in the years to come until the capital moves to D.C. because, for example, one of Washington's cooks, this guy Hercules, he had a lot of friends who were of African descent, who were free. And one day he just disappeared and got his freedom. And so this is what begins to happen. This is the sense of identity and community that is forged in 1793. However, the strength and the power of prejudice is still significant. After the outbreak dies down and is contained, an Irish-born immigrant named Matthew Carey will publish a book which is an account of the fever. It's called A Short Account. I'm going to provide a link to it so you can read it if you want or look at it. A short account of the malignant fever lately prevalent in Philadelphia with a statement of the proceedings that took place. And he publishes this a couple years later. And on page 75 of this 110-page book, he says this. At an early stage of the disorder, the elders of the African church met, and note, he calls them Africans, and offered their services to the mayor to procure nurses for the sick and to assist in the burying of the dead. Their offers were accepted, and Absalom Jones and Richard Allen undertook the former department, that of furnishing nurses, and William Gray, the latter, the interment of the dead. I mean, imagine, all these bodies are being left behind. We could have had additional diseases if the dead had not been buried. So this was a huge, huge work. But this is where Carey turns a little sinister. The great demand for nurses afforded an opportunity for imposition, which was eagerly seized by some of the vilest of the blacks. They extorted $2, $3, $4, and even $5 a night for attendance, which would have been well paid by a single dollar. Some of them were even detected in plundering the houses of the sick. But it is wrong to call for censure of the whole of this sort, as many people have done. The services of Jones and Gray and others have been very great and demand public gratitude. So basically, Carey argues that members of the black community took advantage of the situation to plunder homes and extort desperate people for wages for nursing care. And this reality or this observation would not go unanswered. And this is what I mean when I say that the black community after 1793 has a voice, because Jones and Allen, this is that book I showed you last week, I'll show you again, Documentary History of the Negro People in the United States, Volume 1, by Herbert Aptheker. So it's all primary sources. So they write here, Mr. Carey has observed that for the honor of human nature it ought to be recorded that some of the convicts in the jail, a part of the term of whose confinement has been remitted as reward for their peaceable and orderly behavior, offer themselves as nurses. It ought to be remarked, although Carey has not done it, that 2/3 of the persons who rendered these services were people of color. And when the sickness and fatigue and several of the physicians died, Rush called upon us to help. And basically what he says here is this: the bad consequences many of our color apprehend from a partial relation of our conduct are that it will prejudice the minds of the people in general against us. So what they're saying is, look, Matthew Carey has authored a great slander against our community by saying we are profiteers and we are vile and that we took advantage of the sick and the dying. And that his book, and they say this later on, I'm not going to read the whole thing, was in its 3rd and 4th edition, and that this book circulating around the country was going to create and instill prejudice in the hearts and minds of the readers. And that they would suffer as a consequence of this. And what they are identifying, Allen and Jones, in this pamphlet, which they answered, is that these books, these malicious slanders, as they call them, are dangerous. That here was an extremely deadly event that could have been far deadlier, that could have had far more consequences if not for the heroic, tireless, back-breaking labor of the free black community of Philadelphia, who labored to save the nation's capital at a time when the nation was only 4 years old. And instead of receiving thanks and praise, particularly because the people who did this work are the people who ran into the sick zones and put themselves at risk for sickness and death, and 400 people died who might not otherwise have died, who might have just fled the city, who might have just stayed home in 6th Street where there was not much of an outbreak at all. And they might have lived, but instead they sacrificed themselves for their city, only to be called uncivilized and vile and profiteers and immoral and all these horrible things. And what we see here is kind of this two-edged sword, divergent directions, there you go. That we have a greater sense of community being forged and a greater sense of solidarity within the black community, led by people like Allen and Jones and many others, some of whom which I'll cover as well. But at the same time, you have people like Carey who are also lumping the black community together from the outside, but doing so in a way that paints them in a negative light at a time, 1793, when various northern states were still abolishing slavery, and during which time Americans in government, federal government and state governments, were still calling for the abolition of slavery. The idea of ending slavery because it was incompatible with the American revolutionary ideals was still very much a potential outcome of the American Revolution. Like I said, the following year, after the epidemic in Philly, the French Empire or the French revolutionary government abolished slavery throughout the empire. And it would only be brought back because of a tyrant dictator named Napoleon who crowns himself emperor. So if France abolished slavery throughout the French Empire, you know we had that chance in America, that we didn't have to go in the half and half way, because states were abolishing slavery in the North, and it was still a really live issue. And yet, Carey, kind of like almost what you're saying, Jay, about wanting free labor, Matthew Carey's book makes it easier for people to say, well, but those people. Well, slavery might not be ideal, but the people we enslave, look what happens. They take advantage of sick people. They do these things. And so it creates that dehumanizing separation that will over time make it easier for people to accept the continuation of a system of slavery in a nation that was founded on the premise that all men are created equal and are endowed with certain inalienable rights, which of course Jefferson also wrote in Philadelphia. And so this is where the directions are going. We are seeing in Philadelphia in 93 the birth of something we can call an African American community, right? Which is a community forged across geographic, linguistic, even religious differences from those descendants of Africa, both enslaved and free, who have come together to create a new identity, a new American cultural world. But at the same time, we see a lumping together of people, and it's noteworthy that Carey says the African church leaders, right? African with a capital A even, I'll provide the link, you can read this, and yet when he talks about the negative behavior, he says blacks. He uses the word blacks. The blacks did this. But when people are behaving, they're Africans. And so we even see this kind of maybe subconscious, but nonetheless this use of language where people get reduced and have their humanity taken from them. But nonetheless, 1793, you can we can see collectively, we can see 1793 as the beginning of an African American community that was itself diverse internally, but also nonetheless that had found a means to develop a shared commonality, a shared ideal, and a shared sense of this is our country, this is our community, Philadelphia in this case, and we are willing to work, struggle, and die for it. Alrighty. There's so many other topics I have to cover. Not this week, of course. I'm trying to keep them a little, not to go for an hour. So does anyone have any questions for me? And understand I'll provide you links to the documents if you want to look at them yourself, as well as a online exhibit from the Historical Society of Pennsylvania about Richard Allen that has a piece on the yellow fever. And a link from WHYY PBS of a walking tour, an audio walking tour about the yellow fever, which has one of its stops at Mother Bethel Church. Yeah, Jay mentions coded language in the comments, and we see this. This is one of the classic tools of domination and separation and dehumanization, is using coded language or language that does not reflect the humanity of people, right? These are not black people or people of color or African people or people of African descent. These are blacks. And that reduces their humanity to a description of their skin tone and implies they're different from us. I think I will say much later on, so 18 teens maybe, I believe Matthew Carey ultimately retracted and apologized for his slanders, but by that point it was too late because the books had been circulating for decades. I did enjoy my birthday, Jay. Thank you. So, anyone have any questions about this? I thought it would be a good one given our pandemic that we talked about in Epidemic and what happened. And the fact that back then the community pulled together to try to fight it. Sorry, the black community pulled together to try to fight it, whereas the wealthy and the people who could afford to all ran away. It does continue today. Human beings, our brains are still the same brains that we walked out of Africa with over 10,000 years ago. So it doesn't surprise me that we do the same things over and over again unless we stop and contemplate it and think about it and kind of break that pattern of thought and that cycle of behavior and separation and lumping people together negatively and the like. All right. I shall await any last questions for anyone who might have them. And like I said in the comments, I shall include the links to a few more resources if you want to learn more about the yellow fever epidemic. It's still a very important area of study because we know about the epidemic in kind of the broadest possible terms, like what happened and who did what and these two major books. But what we lack is a lot of kind of personal accounts. So somewhere in this city of Philadelphia, there might very well be personal diaries or written accounts of some of these African and African American nurses who worked their butts off to tend to the sick, to honor the dead, and to save their city. Alrighty. I'll give 30 seconds for last questions. You're very welcome, Jay. And you can always ask questions afterwards if you think of something later. I'm on Facebook, so I'm looking around and checking and seeing things as it develops. You're all very welcome. It's my pleasure to share. I've said it before that I was blessed by the instruction of so many incredibly intelligent and brilliant people. And if I have all this information and I just keep it in my brain, it's kind of just useless there. So I should share it. So I share it with you all. And then I give you information to research more deeply because, again, going back to the beginning, when you consider the source, you should always look for more information from whomever you are listening to. Alrighty. Everyone, have a beautiful Wednesday. The sun's just come out over here in Philly. And feel free, or just so you know, related, this is kind of a random aside. We're in the pandemic, so who knows? But every October in Germantown at Cliveden, which is an old house in Germantown, they reenact the Battle of Germantown. And one of the remarkable things about the reenactment of the Battle of Germantown is that it is one of the few historically accurate reenactments in that it shows the reenactors, many of them are African American because, of course, 1 out of 5 soldiers in the U.S. Revolutionary Army was black. And so if you actually want to see a fully accurate representation and see black faces and black men shouldering arms of the Continental Army, the Battle of Germantown at Cliveden House in October is worth checking out. Alrighty, everyone. Have a beautiful day, and I will see you next week. I'm juggling topics. I'm not sure what it's going to be about, but there's a lot of potentially interesting ones. But I might stay with Philly area bits for now. Okay? Take care, all. Have a great day.